All right, this is part 2 of changing the timing belt / removing the engine from a Passat or an Audi A4. Y'all seen part 1, which is pretty straightforward. Right now we're going to take the belts off, the clutch fan, and this tensioner. Okay, leave the belt on around the clutch fan until you get this. There's a bolt right in behind here, and it's an Allen head. I'm trying to see what size it is. Looks like 5/16 Allen head. We'll get this bolt loose. I actually have it loose. I took it loose ahead of time. Makes the filming a little easier. Okay, then once you get this out, then you can go ahead. Let me get this bolt out real quick and we'll go from there. Okay, this is the bolt in the back of that thing. Okay, make sure when you put it back in, you put some anti-seize on it. And then I have a crescent wrench on the tensioner, but you can use a 1/2 inch ratchet in this hole here in the center. It doesn't matter. It's just easier for me just to use the crescent wrench now that we have this all apart. Let me get you back on the stand. There it is today, warmer than yesterday. Taking the belt off is, pretty straightforward. I mean, if you can't change a fan belt, you probably shouldn't be going any farther in these videos. Then you want to get the tensioner off the bottom for the air conditioner, which is this tensioner right down there. And then we'll get an Allen wrench and get that thing loose. Okay, when you try to get this serpentine belt for the alternator and the water pump off, this bolt has a washer on it that hinders you from sliding this belt out. So this bolt actually has to come out. See, then the belt comes off. Then you can go ahead and put your bolt back. You won't need to take that idler off right now. And then we got, 3 bolts on the idler. This should wiggle right off. Okay, that's all that is. It's just a fan hub. There's the fan belt. And this is the water pump belt. Sorry. And this pulley is a 2-piece pulley. When you take these 3 bolts out, the top of this pulley will come off, and then you can take the belt off. That's how you get this belt off. Okay, I've taken the 3 bolts out. Now the pulley comes off, and you can take that little dinky belt off. Go ahead and take that off too, because you're going to need to get access to the water pump. That's your water pump right there. If you're going to do a timing belt and not do a water pump, don't bother. I don't care if this water pump is a year old or 6 months old, okay? They're $35 new. Why would you take and spend all of this time to get to this without changing this? New belts, new water pump minimum, new timing belt. Never reuse an old timing belt unless it's, just a couple of 3 weeks old or whatever. They stretch into position. It's just not a good idea to reuse them. All right, let me get taking more stuff off. Okay, now what we got to do is we've got to clean this part of that plastic cover off, and you're going to need a 12-point socket to go over the crankshaft bolt. We're going to turn this motor over. Now this motor runs. Okay, so we're not going to be too worried about turning it over by hand, but if, say, the timing belt broke and you go to turn this over by hand, you must turn this over first and line it up to top dead center. There's a mark, there's a mark right there, and there'll be a mark on the pulley, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. But first thing we got to do is clean this cover off right here, because there's marks on that cover I need to get to, and I'm going to mark it with this paint marker. Okay, this is the crankshaft pulley. See the little nick in the pulley lined up with the arrow. Okay, don't hold these two as gospel. See this one here? A little notch in the pulley lined up with the notch in the top. You can see it's a little bit off, okay? It's okay to be a little off. And when I say a little off, you always want it if it's going to be a half a tooth or a half a line off, you always want it to this side, because that means the cam is in positive rotation. It's almost like bumping up the timing on your small block Chevy. You can actually buy this pulley to degree it. You can go 4 degrees or whatever. That's, I don't know, maybe a half a degree, that little bit there. If you do it retarded, it's not going to have any power. So you always want it to be to the positive, not more than a tooth. You hear me? Not more than a tooth, okay? So we've got this one lined up to that arrow, and we're going to do something else after we get this pulley off and get this cover off. We're going to leave everything stationary. I'm going to go ahead and mark everything so you can see. If the belt is broke, what you have to do is I would pull the number 1 spark plug, drop a long extension in there, rotate this slowly, and watch this. Watch this up here until it comes up the top dead center and stops. And then look at this and make sure this lines up. Okay, these cars, sometimes people swap parts. You know, you never know. You know, this pulley could have been swapped. So you know that's why you always double check. So let me get this thing marked and I'll show you what I do. Okay, we're going to mark it there for right now. See, we've got our marks. Okay? Okay, this is what I like to do. I like to put a little punch there and a little punch there. See them? One there and one up there. This way I don't have to keep pulling the cover off, putting the cover on, pulling the cover off, putting the cover on to check the timing marks. Okay, they're lined up here, they're lined up here. You don't have to line this up. All this is basically an intermediate shaft that runs the gear drive for the oil pump on these. So this can be anywhere. So that's basically what you do is you line it up. The tension has to be taut on this side of the belt. These have to be lined up, and then you put your tension on the belt on this side. Okay? Turn it over by hand 2 or 3 times. Line your marks back up to check them to make sure they line up again, just as a safety precaution, because these are such a pain to get to. Now, let's say for instance the belt broke. Now these things are notorious. If the belts break, it's very, very expensive because there's so little tolerance between the valves and the piston. There's 20 valves, there's 5 valves per cylinder. If you broke a bolt, or broke a belt while the engine was running or it was rolling down the road, chances are, I'm telling you, 99% chance, you ruin the head. The easiest way to do it is get the car in this stage. Get the timing marks lined up, put a belt on it, pull the plugs out, do a compression test. You're going to know. Now, for any reason, if while you're putting this belt on, let's say you get the timing marks all lined up, you go ahead and roll this motor over 2 or 3 times by hand with your 12mm socket. Don't use the starter. And something binds up. Chances are one of the valves is probably hung open because it's bent or it broke. And I'm going to show you a good example. Timing belt broke rolling down the road. Okay? But if you notice on this piston, a valve is touched there, and a valve has touched there, and back there. A little bit there. Okay? That's what happens with these things. This thing was going probably 60 miles an hour, the belt broke. Rather than flipping it out of gear and get the motor stopped, they just let it go. And, you know, it kept coming up, beating on the valves. They broke, it flipped over, and drove itself through the top of the piston like a hammer. All right? I'll show you a head. And what I mean by the 20 valve head, I got 2 of them sitting here. This is a 20 valve head. These are the ones that generally hit. Okay? And you can see this one here has actually got a little bit of a wear mark on it. That could be from over revving. Okay? But these are generally the ones that hit because see how close they are to the surface of the head? When that piston comes up and that valve ain't closed, it's not gonna be good. All right, to continue on with pulling the motor out from this stage, don't take the belt off. Leave the belt on. Because we are gonna have to turn this motor over by hand and go through this area here after I get all of this out of here to get torque converter bolts. And you don't want to take the chance of valves hitting anything. So, now we just gotta start picking the accessories off of it. You know, like the first thing I'll do is I'll get the air-to-air off, put this big hose off the turbo. I'll get the front snorkel off with all of this attachment here, the air box. And believe it or not, that frees up a lot of space, just those, you know, couple of pieces. And then I'll get the AC compressor off and just let it dangle. I'll get the alternator and this accessory bracket off and just pull it off to the side with a bungee cord. The intake's got to come off because this intake won't work in the deal I'm going to do with it. So probably the hardest thing you're going to have to do taking this thing apart is the catalytic converter. These things are an absolute pain in the ass. Okay? This one's been replaced and you can't see down there, but there's 3 bolts. Now you can see the top of the one right there. The top of that bolt. And I guarantee you they did not weld it to the converter. So then you got to have 6 hands. You got to have somebody down below spinning the nuts off, somebody up above trying to hold the bolts, which are almost impossible. I like, when I get the converter off, I have a flange I will bolt to that to hold the bolt straight, and I will tack weld them bolts to the converter. So when I stick it back together, I can just go down there and put the bolts in my hand, spin them up. And then you gotta get the exhaust manifold and the turbo, and you know, just part after part after part. So we'll get at it today. All right, see what I mean about, you know, taking the air box out and the loop from the air box to the front of the turbo. Gives you good access to all of this. Once you get that catalytic converter out, then you got about 10 bolts holding the manifold on, and that brings the turbo and everything right off one piece. This is a good time to check, make sure the turbo's not junk. There should be virtually absolutely no up and down play, and definitely no end to end. And this turbo is actually pretty good. And actually I'll show you a bad turbo real quick so you know. This one's bad, okay? See how much up and down play it has? It doesn't hit anything because it's probably ground itself a new path, but it's definitely junk. And if the fins are nicked up in any way, okay, it's bad. That means something's been sucked through the intake. I mean, a small piece of dirt with this thing spinning 20,000 RPMs, hitting them fan blades, it's just totally destructive. All right, what we're going after now is them 3 bolts, a 17 millimeter, and I've actually got a wrench to where you can get underneath and get this bottom one, okay? All right, get ready to take the turbo and the exhaust manifold all off in one shot. The exhaust manifold is held on with about 10 of these, and each one gets a big gigantic flat washer. And what that does is it allows it to expand and contract and still remain the tightness. You have, hold on, you have this coolant pipe to get loose. 2 of them up here, one's oil and one's coolant. Water runs through this as well as oil, and this is the return that goes to the oil pan. Take it off the bottom of the turbo and not the oil pan, or it's going to dump oil everywhere. And like I said, you've got all of these to get loose and get out. They're pretty easy with a short extension and air ratchet and 12 millimeter socket. They come right out. This motor has been worked on previously, and I can tell because some of the harder ones to get to were actually just finger tight. They were not tight. And now we'll go ahead and, so I've got the catalytic converter off. You've seen my wrench for that. Here's the oil line and the coolant line I have stuck up here. Okay, that's water. That's why I got my bucket, because when you pull that, you're going to lose probably a quart of water. Make sure you flush this out really well. When you put it back together, what I would do is take some like assembly lube, pump it in this one, closest to the center, spin the turbo, pump it, you know, spin it until it drains out the bottom. That way you know you've got some oil inside of it really well. Let me go ahead and pull the turbo off. Okay. Right now we're getting the test for it, so let's stop and pick up the gear. That's the rest of the metal washer we took a grab. Okay. I'm not going to reuse that. We're going to buy a new exhaust manifold gasket, which I have. This is the wastegate. You know, it's a pretty simple turbo setup. It's a K04, which is a very popular turbo, and there goes some more water. But see how they split the manifold? So when it heats and contracts, each pipe can heat and contract on its own. When you install the set of headers, like on a small block Chevy, in between, you know, you got one pipe, 2 bolts, cut it. And you won't have the leakage problems that you normally have. Notice I got damn near everything tore off this side of the motor. I got the AC dryer, hose assembly. I got everything piled up over there. I'm going to take, I've already unplugged the injectors. Real simple. You just push these little things in, pop them off. There's 2 bolts right here. One there and one back here to hold the rail on. I'll take this upper radiator tube off, and it bolts to the, you can't see it, but there's a thing in the back that it bolts to. Take the intake off, and then that makes this a whole lot easier to try and take bell housing bolts out, oil cooler lines off. You know, just makes your life a whole lot easier doing that. So let me go ahead and get these off. All right. We got the whole right side of the engine taken apart. The whole water pump assembly, intake, power steering, the brackets, the hoses we just left on the car. We'll end up taking them off the rack here later. This looks like a jumbled up mess, but it's not as bad as you think. A lot of that stuff is laying there, just needs to be flipped up out of the way.